Hello, how's it going?
Hello, hello, hello.
And welcome back to What Will the Smart Party Do? Last time we played an Ubersreich adventure for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, the Mad Men of Gotheim, as it's called. In our series, as you know, we try and run things pretty much as written in the scenario, and then we can talk about it afterwards and find out what we liked, what we didn't, what could perhaps be added, that kind of thing. Really do a bit of a forensic analysis of the scenario, and then come up with perhaps some suggestions that you at home, if you want to play it, might use, or maybe it's just of interest for you to go through it. So we've got the same team. I'm Gaz from the What Would the Small Party Do podcast. We've got my co-host Baz as well.
Hello there.
We've got our guest player Shane. Hi Shane.
Oh,
And we've got Matt from Steve O's Games,
Hello.
our regular. So there we are. We played this game pretty straight. All the players had characters that were from the starter pack that you can get. So that's freely available from Cubicle 7. They're more expanded in the starter set, but you can get the PDF anyway, I think, online. So these are advanced characters, so quite capable by Warhammer standards, but the adventure, I think, does have some tough bits in it, so that seemed to make sense.
Hmm.
So is it worth me opening up to you guys first and foremost and saying, what did you think of the scenario, and is there anything that stood out to you, or perhaps things that you want to question, or anything like that?
okay. So I really enjoyed this scenario. So that's the first thing to say about it. Thank you very much for running it and for playing, guys. Really good, short and sweet, and definitely got to where we wanted to be. What I really enjoyed about the scenario was that it was Warhammer, and it was clearly Warhammer. The assets that you used, Gaz, were really evocative for me. They were right on the money for that kind of look, and the naming conventions and the way that you portrayed the NPCs. I think you could have done that game in any other system, and it would have been generic. It's a village. There's a monster, essentially, if you really boil it down. But it becomes Warhammer when you've got desperate commoners who've all got a bit of a unique selling point. It's usually like missing teeth or like one ear or something like that, or their only weapon is a frying pan. But I think it's just beautifully Warhammered all the way through. It's there's madness, there's corruption, there's mud on the floor. You've got social classes kicking about and pushing people around, and then to sort of cap it all off, you've got this kind of bloated chaos creature that doesn't really even have a name that we need to find out about, and it gets pretty desperate. So for me, it ticked a lot of the Warhammer boxes in about 90 minutes. Even though I suspect what we'll say is that the structure of the scenario is pretty route one.
Yeah. Yeah, how about you, Shane? This was the first time you actually managed to play Warhammer in decades, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've GM'd it over the years, but it's actually the first time I'm at the player side of the screen. So yeah, really good fun. Thanks for running it and inviting me along. Yeah, echo a lot what Baz said. It shouted Warhammer. It had those touchstones that you expect, absolutely. But also like strong start. You come to somewhere familiar and it's in ruins. That's always a good sort of get you in. You immediately see the further evidence of that from the mob at the start. So yeah, it's a good. You can't have a passive start to this scenario, and that's a really good thing. Absolutely. The NPCs, none of them are boring. Some of them are one note, but they're one note in the right way, if that kind of makes sense. They're all, because of the madness, they're all dialed up to 11, which is good because it keeps them separate in your mind. It means you can deal with them with that. The interactions are going to be memorable, which I like. I think it packs quite a lot into quite a short period of time, if you know what I mean. But yeah, there's some good sort of strong points there, and it's always nice to see a big terrifying chaos monster because we beat it. Well, we'll get to it later, but the other two beat it. I constantly had that feeling of it was never a foregone conclusion, and that grim and perilous bit of Warhammer absolutely came through. So yeah, I like that.
Well, Matt, you're in a Sigmarite priest kind of pose, so I'm going to suggest you might have something slightly different to say.
Yeah, I think. Well, look. There's the good news is I think there's huge room for improvement on the scenario, and I don't. But I'm careful. I'm cautious about how to kind of frame that because I had a good time. I enjoyed playing with you guys. I thought you ran a brilliant scenario. The visuals were great. I love Warhammer. I'm less enamoured with the system. The crunchiness does feel hard work sometimes, and I think there was a few bits and pieces that we all forgot at different points in time that kind of felt important once I'd remembered them. And you know, for example, when I was parrying the beast, I should have been doing damage to it when I successfully parried it. I forgot that, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's just part of the foibles of the system. So I think you do need a group who has a system mastery and an investment in the system to get the most out of it. But if you've got that, the Warhammer world, as the other guys have said, is just dripping with flavour. And I think that scenario delivered the flavour. I did find it a little bit hard to work out how I was motivated about getting involved with it.
I mean, that's just our setup, right? Because we were just chucking ourselves at an adventure with some characters you just got a few hours ago. So
yeah, but then it was. But then I mean, look, I don't want to. You asked me my initial feelings. I think there's room for improvement. There's definitely plenty of stuff for us to talk about over the next half an hour or so. And I'll look forward to kind of doing that. I'm not going to blow my whole load in one go.
yeah. I think what I was trying to dig there for a little bit is like the scenario things, because you mentioned the system, and that's the system, whatever. We can't do anything about that. And why you're there, well, individual groups can decide that for themselves. So it was more trying to like just dig a little bit around. Was there something in the scenario, the way it was structured, or something that perhaps you had a comment on? But that's all right. We can talk around it all.
Yeah, that's what I was driving at. Really, was with why is my character there? Is I mean, why we're traveling along that road? I'm totally cool with that. We can make up whatever the heck we want. And you were right. We're going from Ubersreich to wherever. But once the attack happened, there was no real reason for Gunnar or any of us to really go, oh, okay, this is really important. We've got to go and do this thing. It was like a bunch of mad villagers had attacked us. And I've played with some playing groups who go, fair enough. Oh, look, there's a town that's on fire. All right, well, we'll go that way. There was no compelling hook for the players.
Without wanting to be contentious, I think that's really... I don't think any scenario is going to solve that problem. I think our group's always going to try and get engaged with it.
I mean,
Sorry, go on, Jim.
If you're going to run it as a one-shot, rather than just sort of travelling past the town, pick whichever of the characters is the most either bleeding heart or sort of loyal type, and you're stopping in to visit kin on the way past, and that immediately gives that personal stake that would drive at least one of the characters, and therefore by extension the others. But I completely get what you were saying, Matt, in that if you don't have something like that, our motivation in this case was because we were playing the scenario.
Yeah.
Did the scenario provide you with any hooks, Gaz? Most do, don't they? Even if they're a bit lame.
They do. There's a bunch of these Ubersreich ones, and I think they've been written, to be fair to Cubicle, so in the way of this is just supposed to be dropped in wherever. So I gave it the default. You're from Ubersreich to wherever it was, but it could be anything. And it's designed as a scenario for dropping in somewhere or travel somewhere. Basically, just to use the one hit. So I do take the point. I get what you're saying, that it probably bears thinking about for individual campaigns for GMs to think about why would my players actually interact with it, because some might just not want to. Like on the converse side, what I found a little bit odd is it starts out with a mob attacking you, and from the way it's written is there's nothing you can do about that. They just attack you. It's like you can't talk them down, you can't intimidate them.
Right.
So I did wonder whether some playing groups were like, well, I don't want to kill villagers. Obviously they're frenzied or mad or whatever, but I'm not just going to like slaughter turnip farmers because they're attacking me. I don't know. Like, you guys engage with it, which is fine, but there's no advice in the scenario to tell you what to do if players just run away, for example, because that takes you straight away from the village. Then you sort of halfway to Ubersreich before you sort of pause to take a breath.
I must admit, I didn't quite understand. I could see they were a frenzied mob, but they came running out of the woods. I think I mentioned that during play as well.
Yeah.
What were they doing in the woods?
No idea. This is the short answer.
To Matt's point, having murdered some townspeople, arguably the last place we would want to go is the town, which might have, their friends and relations, or somebody has seen this happen. I mean, I use my soldier background to think I've got a duty to the Reichsland. And I want to get involved in the adventure, and clearly that's where it was. But it is a strange way of driving you into it, because I have a feeling that mob attack is the hook somehow.
Yeah, so it said before it begins, you hear a frenzied mob approach, running through the trees to the west of the road, whooping and yelling threats as they close in. But like, why are they not coming out of the village to defend their village? Because that seems that what it ultimately says is like that's their motivation is they think they're attacking the village or whatever. But why up to the tree someone coming from a different direction? I'm not really sure.
I mean, if anything, if they came out of the village gates and they shot a couple of arrows at you and threw some like frying pans at you and then just ran back in the village, you'd at least then be tempted to go into the village and find out what the heck was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it also says you get like 3 rounds after the first turn to prepare yourselves, but I don't know what, given this is the initial contact, I don't know what you'd be preparing for, to be honest. And that's a bit odd.
Would the mob chasing another villager, perhaps from the trees back to the village, be a better inciting incident then? Because, you know, you've got a reason to at least intervene on the side of that villager. At that point, and that way that also solves that thing you were saying, Baz, about, you know, having just murdered the villagers. If, you know, even if you kill some of them in self-defense, you've got a villager on your side, as it turns out insane and therefore not relevant, but you know, that gives that sort of bit.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and it's a nice little exposition device then, isn't it? So in moments of lucidity they can kind of give you a little bit of the plot. There's a massive beast, it's attacked the village and driven everyone mad. Can you help? And then they kind of switch personalities. That'd be quite cool, actually.
And it's easy enough if you want. Just while you get involved with the mob, that other villager can just run up into the village, which gives you a reason to go after them into the village to find out what's going on.
Yeah. Especially if it's the priest of Sigmar who ends up being beheaded later on, or caught in a forge explosion, or we see the people in the inn waving out of the window that he's about to leap out of. We think he's motioning for help, and then he commits suicide right in front of us. You know, not more Warhammer. There was plenty of little Warhammer moments to have, wasn't there? But the very first one just seemed a bit odd.
You could have the Burgermeister be the one being chased.
Yeah.
And because then when he goes to kill himself later on, it's you saved him and now he's killed himself. It's that, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, or I mean, I don't know. I quite like the fact that it's in media res that something happened straight away.
True.
Like, another way for a mysterious village. If there wasn't a mob at all, and you went into the village to find out what had gone on, and then the first thing you come across is the Burgermeister, etc. Because then you don't know why he's trying to jump out of a window. It all seems crazy, you know.
No, I agree, mate. I mean, there was the standard for a lot of adventures is you go to a strange village and you make your investigation to find out what's going on. It turns out to be something a little bit supernatural. There might be a twist, there might not, and eventually there's a confrontation. This was that, and to be fair, that slightly weird first encounter did press it in a different direction straight away. So I suppose in a way it was effective. But if we'd been playing a campaign, I take Matt's point on this massively. Our 3 characters have no connections straight out the starter booklet. We're a pretty odd bunch, even for an adventuring party. So, you know, you kind of got to throw big hooks at strange adventuring parties to get something to happen. And a Troll Slayer is a weird character for motivation anyway. It can be difficult to write scenarios for Troll Slayers that don't involve a troll and a halfling and a noble. It's almost like a joke waiting to write itself, isn't it? And we literally did walk into a bar.
Yeah, I did take the point. I think that the point I was trying to make slightly is that not if every scenario has reasons of why there's hooks for your characters, that becomes some of the page count that you've got to write every time to suggest reasons. People might get involved, but yeah, from the discussions we've been having there's definitely ways you could do it to make it more interesting and have some bait in the village for people to go into it.
Yeah. Because as soon as you step on that treadmill, you're going to ride it. It's just getting you on that treadmill with a reasonable hook.
Yeah,
I think Shane's idea is solid gold. To be honest with you, have the mob chasing someone. You're trying to defend that person. While you're defending them, they run off, tearing their hair out, screaming something about a monster attacking, and then you're in. I think that's really elegant.
There's one. Yeah, the one thing I probably want to make sure about there is that you don't then use him as a plot device for exposition, as you sort of like alluded to, because the sort of story works because everybody's got like a little bit of story from their own perspective.
Yeah,
you don't want someone who's going to give you a dump. You want to give you the hook. You want to get you involved, and then I think they need to perish or run off or whatever it happens to be.
I mean, they can give you a little nugget, can't they? And I think one of the things that came across when we were playing it was it was quite clear that each location had a nugget of information to discover. And then it then felt a little bit like we were ticking off the places that we've been to get all the nuggets. Whereas, and it felt a little bit like, well, we have to go there because we haven't been there yet and find out the bit that's happened there. Oh, okay, that bit's happening.
You do that anyway. Like when we were playing before, if like I mentioned someone's name, you want to go and speak to them to make sure in case they've got something. So
yeah, exactly.
I think you do that regardless, wouldn't you?
All the way out to the lake to find out that it's not at the lake kind of thing. Like, oh god.
To be fair, not every scenario needs to be a multi-branching path of over-interlocking complex stories. Sometimes you can just have a romp through a Munster village like this, and they don't all have to be, those sort of step-by-step putting together of clues. They can just be everybody's got a bit of info and then there's a fight sometimes.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning actually, as we're talking about like locations and stuff, that I altered the map. Please don't sue me, Cubicle 7. This was for the sake of the purposes of the adventure and promoting our game. But the map you get as is has all sort of 10 locations that might be on it, which may or may not give something away. There's little details that do give a bit away, I think. So if you look at the stones in the original map, it's actually got footprints from the stones going into the cave mouth.
Right.
But if you've got eagle-eyed players that see that, and it is a handout, it's not like a handout page as well, it's not just the GM map.
Oh, they'll see that.
Oh, well, there's some footsteps over here going in the cave.
Yeah, we're going to go to the cave.
We didn't even see the stones on the map.
Yeah.
No. Well, that's... To be fair, because we're playing online, I kept whipping you around with the pictures, so you didn't get to study the map too much.
Yeah,
disguise that for you, but...
I think the way that I would have pimped it, so there's two things that really occur to me is I like the lazy DM's style where I would have taken all the secrets or all the nuggets and put them as a generic list, and then wherever the players went, then deploy. So you could have had a mad person at the beginning and they just give one nugget away, and that's fine, that's all they ever give away. But at least you feel like you've got something out of that interaction. So I definitely would think about that. If I was prepping for that adventure, that's how I'd approach it. But the other thing that's probably a little bit more complicated, I like the idea of introducing consequences for choices. So, for example, we go into the village, there's the forge, it looks like it's on fire, and then there's the tavern. So, let's say we go to the forge. As you walk to the forge, you see the Burgermeister kill himself. Oh crap, if we'd gone there, we might have been able to save him. So, rewind. Right, we're going to go to the tavern. You go to the tavern and suddenly there's a massive explosion from the forge and there's people running out on fire. And have those kind of cause and effects around. So now suddenly it feels a lot more pressurized, like, oh God, we need to make the right decisions at the right time, otherwise we're not going to get everything we need out of this. And almost pull us around the town through these events happening.
Yeah, it is a way of doing it. I mean, Bezo, a player with a good friend of ours, he would hate that. Is sort of the counterpoint that if I give him, do you want to go A or B, and then C's going to happen. It's like if he gets something wrong, like he feels like he made the wrong choice. So it's not a bad idea by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a matter of gauging it with your players to make sure that they're happy with that and won't feel like they're losing.
Well, that's true for any advice, really. Is like you need to interpret it for your playing group.
Yeah, I'll just give you a specific example.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the things that I tried to stick to, but it made me scream my face at when I read the adventure, is that for each of those nuggets that you try and go and get, it explicitly states a roll to make. So I can't remember exactly, but it's something like to get the Burgermeister to step down, you have to make a charm roll. Like you can't intimidate him or bribe him or anything like that. It has to be charm. And someone else you have to like the blacksmith you have to pander to. You can't try and threaten him. You've got to say a nice thing to him, and then he'll listen to reason. And Gerd, the butcher, won't listen to reason no matter what you say to him. So there's a bunch of that written into the scenario, which you just think just doesn't help. Like if the players go up and want to take an approach with an NPC, to me it feels more natural generally to kind of go do what you want, because I can't imagine how I'd run this, telling people no to things until they pick the right thing to say yes to. I just can't. That for my style, I don't think I could do that.
It's hard to think absolutes as well, because the blacksmith, you might not be able to intimidate the blacksmith, for example, but if you're a dwarf troll slayer with a crowbar between his legs, I think that trumps that you can't intimidate him as you ran with it. So, I mean, it will be a problem if you've got perhaps a hidebound GM or a very inexperienced one. But I think otherwise, most GMs will do what you did and flex it to fit what happens.
Yeah, and I was sort of a little bit uncomfortable with a couple of characters who don't have anything to tell you either, and that feels. It just feels bad when like most of the characters do. So it feels like everyone should at least have something to say. But in general, the way it's written is pretty good. That there's like these different filters in terms of how we sell the monster, and they all see it differently. And some of the stuff's actually valuable. So the spiked armor, you could actually convince the blacksmith to take that. Let you wear it. In which case, it gives you defense against its tongue attacks and various other things if it tries to bite you, for example. And I think one of the other suggestions is that instead of kids, use kids as in goats as bait. So you can perhaps take some of the goats that are bleating around the farm and use them to draw the monster out of that kind of thing as well. So.
That'd be so cool if you found the handwritten plan was use the kids to bait the monster.
Yeah.
Everyone gets terrified of that. And then he finds out that they are in fact just baby goats.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be very Warhammer. It would be the other way around, wouldn't it, if it was Warhammer?
Was there any clues as to the behaviour required to get the specific role, like built into the character? So if you'd said sort of like if the clue was the blacksmith is like a man of towering arrogance and self-importance, you can tell just by looking around his workshop that he's someone who takes pride in himself. Then that might give you a bit more of a clue to act in a certain way.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I tried to play him up as arrogant and focused on his work. As a direction. Well, one example I've got here is the Burgermeister, and it gives you all the stuff about how he, jumped out of the pub to escape a fire when he was a young boy, and now he's reliving that moment, kind of thing. So which is fine, but it's not really going to come out and play too much unless you push it. And then specifically in bold, it says the characters can talk Wilhelm down if they deal with him politely and patiently, but it requires a successful, difficult charm test. And that, that's kind of it.
I find this a challenge in all investigation scenarios. I've spoken about this many times before, so just to précis it for everybody, I find it quite hard to investigate and to play a character at the same time. If my character is arrogant, noble, etc., and I'm playing to type, and it's a bit stereotypical, I guess, it's quite hard to just turn on the charm, even if there's enough keys in the situation to go, you need to be charming to get the most out of this. Yeah, but now I feel like I'm betraying my character. And it's not to the level of my character would do that, but it's quite difficult to, I find, to be that way, to totally flex your way around those sort of social situations and keep to whatever personality system it is your game gives you.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have to think a way of, I don't know, you could kind of go for the upper class option, couldn't you? Say, come, like, you're the leader of the town, I'm a noble, we should discuss this and try and charm that way. But given the situation that some guy's trying to hurl himself out of a window, it doesn't seem like the sort of thing you'd say in that situation. I think what I would prefer to see
to go and be nice to the woman, which he did, because I thought I wouldn't be. So,
but isn't that in and of itself actually good spotlight sharing? So your character is no good, or your character's character is not good at charming or being persuasive, but that's an opportunity for you to pass the spotlight to another person's character whose personality might fit that better. And I think that's a really nice improv technique of passing the mic and not taking the spotlight as.
I think I agree. What I'd like to see, instead of it being quite so definitive in the scenario, saying you must use this skill for this character, it'd be if you use this skill, you get no penalties or whatever it might be, and if you're using something else, they're truculent or they don't agree with that style, or so you get this penalty associated with it. So just so it's not quite so definitive about saying you have to use this skill for this character. But you can apply a penalty, which then again leads people to spotlight share a bit more in that sort of stuff.
There's an awful lot, and Baz and I have talked about this quite a bit. Cause, we've ran a few investigations in the D&D campaign that we're playing, but there's a different mind shift that you have to have, and I think it feels like this adventure would benefit from it. Is at the moment it feels like it follows the more traditional social interaction, which is here's a player or here's an NPC that has a thing, and in order for you to get the thing, you need to find the exact right key and unlock it. and that's great if you find the key, and really, really not great if you don't find the key, and it's quite frustrating, and it's almost down to a single dice roll. Whereas if the adventure, if you took that and rewrote that to say, this character will give you this thing definitely, and if you succeed, it will give you this thing, and if you fail, it will give you this thing, but then also this bad thing happens. So take the Burgermeister. He will tell you his nugget of information, but if you fail the charm roll, it'll be the last thing he ever says as he throws himself out the window and snaps his neck. If you succeed in the charm roll, he tells you and will step down and maybe reward you with an extra nugget of information. So you always get that progression forward into the scenario, and it feels like you're kind of getting somewhere rather than trying to constantly find the exact key for the exact lock.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. I think lean into your system if you're a scenario writer. If you ever get really bored and you want to get a quick start adventure for any game, but this one in particular, go over it with a highlighter and just highlight any of the time it calls out a skill for you to roll. There's always very, very few of them, actually. You'll see a perception test probably quite early on. You might get mentioned, you need cartography to get from here to there, but I doubt it. But there won't be that many. And they certainly wouldn't even ever tell you what skills to roll in a combat. They'll just line up the opponents and let the system carry the weight for it in the scenario notes. So I always think, and I don't know what Shane's experience is, but I do know what Shane's experience is. You will run a lot of games where you don't have a scenario to follow with a bunch of skill check gates in it anyways. You just follow the fiction and let the system do it. If you know the Burgermeister has got a terrible secret that he will give up at the very last, and that he's envious of so and so and the rest of it, and you read the personality traits, then there's a GM skill that is like, you pick the skills based off what the players are doing, and let it go where it may. You want to give out the clues, of course you do, but you don't need to have it gated at all by the scenario writer, do you?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's at the end of the day, if we get a bit meta, the NPC's job is to communicate either information, some kind of feel, or some kind of threat. So one of those three things. They're the only three things NPCs really do. They give you colour, information, or threat. And if they're designed to give you information, then you're going to get that information. It's like that whole sort of, that constant problem you heard from the bad old days of Call of Cthulhu. What happens if I fail library use? Well, you get the info, but there's a problem, obviously. And this is that same situation. So yeah. But because I want the information to be given out, if I've got a character who's not naturally charming, for example, take the noble, he's a Burgermeister, he would probably be used to obeying what the local noble says when the local noble's on the tour. So that way, if a noble gets the tour commanding, that's going to be enough for me to say, yeah, you definitely got the information. He's probably going to go plummeting afterwards, but you get it. So yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. And I think perhaps, I've not read this scenario quite deliberately because we're playing it. But I think if I'm reading through a scenario like that and I see specifically gated skill rolls, I'm asking myself, why? Is there a specific reason that one thing can do it? And in most circumstances, I bet the answer is no.
Yeah, correct. It does. It does spread them around. It's like someone needs intimidating, someone needs charming, that kind of thing. So I can see why it's done, but as we've discussed, there's better ways of doing it, I think.
Do you think the Burgermeister would have made an interesting, almost like a MacGuffin bad guy, where I quite it feels Warhammer plus to me if he turned around and said, I tried to do a deal with it, get rid of that hated Sigmar priest, she's been messing up my ideas, but it's all backfired, it's all gone wrong, I can't take any more, and then throws himself out the window. And now you kind of think, well, he's kind of brought it upon himself, but now there's loads of innocent people who are suffering as a result of it, and the Sigmar priest has been murdered. I don't think it changes anything to the scenario, does it, mechanically, but gives you a human face to the bad guy, if you know what I mean.
And it's always better when it's our fault, our being, humanity or, elfanity or whatever.
Elfanity.
Yeah, new word, elfanity. Some words you wish you'd never said them after you said them. But yeah, so, you could take, for example, that entire backstory bit about him regressing, and he can just be trying to throw himself out the window, riddled with guilt. The barmaid doesn't know why he's riddled with guilt. So maybe you investigate the Burgermeister's house and you find out that actually he's secretly been worshipping the Chaos Gods.
Yeah.
Maybe you then get that nugget of information that gives you a way perhaps to protect yourself from the splashing blood of doom, which we'll come to later, I'm sure. But and that way, that could add that cultist in the mix, especially if you throw in there, as I said, a real human reason why the Burgermeister's been doing it. And obviously the why, I don't understand why he's killed himself. But he hasn't been the same recently. He's not let anybody in his house. He's kept the place shuttered. Oh, there's the big glowing sort of drag over to the house, and then you find this information. But of course, he's burned most of his notes because he's riddled with guilt. So there's only little fragments to give you that little bit of a clue to help deal with the beast, but not any solid info about what the beast is.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, you can. I mean, the scenario was a bit shorter, so that's why I switched to this one close to the time. But that one had Chaos Cultist in it, and I think for me, it's nice to not have humans worshipping chaos in it. But yeah, if you want to run that, that's definitely an option. You could do that. I think I find the characters could have more to them. They have all got that. They've all got a magic nugget to give you. Once they have, the writing very quickly goes to, and then they're inconsolable and won't tell you anything else. So that does feel a little bit limited. You could do an extra couple of points for each of them to kind of say stuff they'll say or do to give you something else. So, for example, the barmaid, if she's left alone, throws herself out the same window as the Burgermeister, which I think we sort of played out. But it's like, that's it. That's all there is to her. Like, if the Burgermeister dies, she has nothing to say. She goes and kills herself when you leave her alone. It's like, okay, that's I guess, but that's not giving me anything to play with as a GM kind of thing. I prefer a bit more to it. Perhaps there's, she wants to search through the wreckage for a loved one, or, there's something else. Like she says, I'm going to have to go to the cold store to get some food and see what I can do to feed people. So, someone's gone off to that direction and that kind of thing. Perhaps more. I suppose another part of the adventure that I wanted to touch on is it does mention the priest's head is on the inside of the East Palisade or something. You're supposed to potentially find that, and that might be a way where you go to the cold store first. There's a couple of hints to the lake and a couple of hints towards the Occam Stone saying, oh, the strange, weird stones. So you could go in one of two directions there. But there's not a strong indicator, and it feels like if you go straight there, you're missing something out. The sort of mechanic that's added, there's a little chart at the start, which I find a bit odd. It depends on real time how long you spend doing things, I think. And then, it's game time expired. So the Jebusite has been wounded and starts to regenerate over time, even though I don't think regeneration is actually one of its abilities, but it just does whatever. And it's got like a broken nose and bruised ribs and a broken jaw, and all these other like injuries and wound penalties. And as the clock ticks around in real time, it regenerates them until, if it's been a couple of hours, it's fully healed. And if it's an hour 45, it's got 8 less wounds and it's still got a devastated eye or something.
But the players don't know this at all.
No, and the GM is leading the pace, so it's kind of a bit. And then it's got like marks for when the people.
Oh God! So if you're an absolute butthole of a GM, you just like drag it out for 3 hours and go, ha ha ha, full power.
Yeah. Just need to 2 hours and then So I like that there's that kind of thing to it that. You could meet it when it's still wounded and therefore get an advantage. What I don't like is it's based on real time, which players might not have any control over, and there's not even any awareness of the ticking clock.
It's screaming out for a cutscene at the beginning where it's dark. You can hear dripping sounds. You can see this, like, little close-ups of the beast. Like a curious tongue comes out and licks at a wound as black purple liquor drips out, and you see all the wounds seal shut, and that's it. And you're like, oh wow, what's going on? That's kind of spooky.
Yeah, you can intersperse them, I think, but it's a bit. So if you guys had decided to go east rather than north, you'd have got there 15 minutes earlier, and it would have had slightly fewer wounds and would have gone down a bit quicker.
We would have never known.
It would have still had a broken nose or something, but how can you tell?
Does that not scream? And this is something that the youngsters of today won't be familiar with. The idea of tournament scenarios. Remember back in the old sort of Gen Con UK D&D tournament days, where the whole competitive groups trying to outscore each other thing, and that strikes that sort of real game time elapsed is one of those absolutely sort of emblematic elements of an old tournament scenario mentality.
I mean, it smacks of Call of Cthulhu con games to me.
Yes.
Where you cannot possibly meet the baddie until it wants to meet you, and that happens at 3:30 real time, because then that'll be the last half hour of the convention.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
So it's what I did take from the table though, so it was useful, is the events occurring in the village a little bit. So it inspired me anyway. So I went off track. Sorry everybody, but it says when the forge will explode, and that's after an hour of game time. And you may or may not have been anywhere near a forge at that point, which seems stupid. But then there's a bit where it says Martha, the barber surgeon, leads the remaining village children into the forest or something, that kind of thing. So that gave me the idea that as you were fighting the beast, the villages you've encountered should come back and be doing something, or be trying to, because they should be enacting their plans. Otherwise, why do you show them?
Yeah,
building up in the first place, kind of thing.
Oh, that's nice. How they know that he's at the caves that we spent all day investigating, I don't know.
Yeah, when they didn't know where he was.
They didn't know earlier, but it doesn't matter.
Because Martha says she's in the forest of the north, but then she turns up after an hour in the east. So I don't know.
Maybe they followed us.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about motivation for the characters. What is the monster's motivation? Is he just hungry?
Yeah, he's just a monster.
Right. Okay. Well, sometimes it's enough, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a bit weird that it seems to live in the cave and like one attack on the village devastates it completely. So I think he just found somewhere to sit and regenerate for a bit, and then it'll go off to wherever else it can for the next village. But and that's the way you could build this up, I suppose, is you could find some devastated hamlets or something in advance, and your other travels as a group of players, and then later in the campaign you get to this point and you see the telltale purple ichor and that kind of thing, and you think, hang on a minute, we've seen this plenty of places before, and it helps you with more buy-in as to why you might want to put an end to it.
And that actually segues nicely into one thing I wanted to mention, because it should definitely be later in the campaign, because it's a pretty tough bad guy.
It's horrendous.
And it suffers from something that in a lot of games, when you have one tough bad guy, and unless it's a game like D&D where everybody's got their niche in combat, if it's a game where there isn't, an even spread of the combat level between the character types, a single big tough bad guy is, some characters are just not going to be able to affect it. I mean, aside from one lucky critical hit that gave it a slightly damaged nose, effectively, my character could do nothing to it. Now, thankfully, because there was other things to do at that time, dealing with the kids, the barber surgeon, it wasn't a case of I just twiddle my thumbs and roll ineffective attack rolls. But I think if the group didn't have a couple of combat characters or a good spread of combat characters and something for the not combative characters to do in that fight, it is that one big tough monster that only a few of the characters can hurt.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there were some abilities I didn't really go with. So I think the first thing to mention is there's a summary of the village's anti-Jabber's life measures, which you can use. So there's a spiky suit, beta things. There are some drugs in the barber surgeon's apothecary that you didn't look for, but, that may or may not help. Something I didn't mention from the forge is that one of them suggests superheating the anvil and dropping it on the Jabber's life. I consider that as an option, but it's like, quite rightly, one of the other NPCs mocks that round thing. Goes, well, how would that even work?
How do you
something? So I didn't even bring it up. But they mentioned this. I do like that idea of, because it's a big tough monster. The authors thought of, here's some things you might find along the way that might help you. So that in and of itself is quite good.
Yeah. This is the Warhammer version of a dragon, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it should be that tough. And I was going to say it should have some vulnerability that we could maybe research in the village. It's difficult to balance, but it's essentially you reskin that, and it's a pretty classic scenario, isn't it? There's not much to it.
I think
like the Warhammer drapings on it, but
the mechanical flaw with it, if I was running that adventure, the tweak I'd make to that monster is that every time you hit it, it does automatic minimum 1 wound, means that the party just loses all advantage every single round. And that's what drags it makes the fight horrendous. The whole idea of advantage is it accelerates. It's like the round dice in 13th Age, isn't it? There's no escalation. There's no acceleration. It's like, I've got +3. Oh, now I've got +none again. Right? And you're not getting those extra big damagey hits. I mean, Baz's character was doing big damagey hits because I think you were whiffing your rolls extra hard. Yeah. And the only reason I noticed is every time I attacked, it seemed to kind of get like 2 successes, and I was going, oh great, 9 then. And then like Baz would attack and you go, oh, it got -4, and I'm like, why can't I get that? I could do like 20 damage with that.
That's random for you.
I mean, it's the luck of the draw, but it was losing that advantage that just felt like a killer every time it happened.
That blood ability turned off a piece of the combat system. Just turned it off, didn't it?
Yeah.
Which seems a bit negative play experience.
Yeah, again, I probably need to read again on the advantage. There might have been something extra we could have done there, but the traits of the creature, I think there's probably too many. So it's got armor 3 and toughness 5, so you take 8 wounds off any damage you do straight away. So that in and of itself is pretty hard. It's bestial, so it will shy away from fire and gains the broken condition if struck by it and things like that. So that's possibly something you can give away about fire and stuff, but a superheated anvil isn't the answer. It's got a bite.
Matt didn't come up with that idea, so you know it's no good.
a bite and a tail attack, which you can use free by spending an advantage. So what I could have done is when I'd attacked and hit one of you, is then spend the advantage straight away and got another extra free attack on top of that, which seems rude. So I didn't. It bounces, so it can leap high and double movement for running a jump in, which is neither there. The corrosive blood we've mentioned. It's distracting, so you should have all had -20 to all your tests if you're within toughness yards of it. So I ignored that. It's infected, so if it causes any wounds to you, then you've got to pass an endurance test or contract the festering wound. It's got the maddening aura, which I just used once, but it's supposed to be every round you roll to see whether you get mental or not. It's got night vision. It didn't impose any night penalties on you for the dark cave. Just left it as it was. It's enormous. So it's 2 sizes larger than the dwarf and the human and 3 sizes larger than the hobbit. And you're supposed to suffer a penalty defending of 2 success levels for each step larger it is. So really should both have been at -4 success levels.
Holy moly.
And then it would have done double damage because it was 2 steps bigger.
Yeah. And if it had hit you, it would have done triple damage and you're at -6 success levels to defend against it. So that's
the TPK. Even if you got 5 players, that's still.
It activates the death blow rule against smaller opponents again. The weapon should get the impact quality against you or damaging. So basically, I can add the d10s together rather than just doing its +X damage.
Yeah,
and do ridiculous amounts to you, which I didn't do. The tongue attack allows it to ensnare you, and then it gets free attacks against you. But I didn't use that. And then it's got venom as well. So when it did hit you, you should have taken the poison condition on top. So at least half of the abilities I just didn't use because even with what I did use, it was pretty touch and go anyway, I think.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, even with, a soft spot we could learn about that we could cold shock to ignore the armor or some other, weakness like that, actually, if you'd have used all those abilities, we'd have been dead within 2 or 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And our characters are nearly 2,500 experience points each. We're not novices, are we?
Yeah.
About 10 adventures in or something.
Yeah.
Do you
10
think,
sessions.
20, according to the book we got them from.
Right. Okay.
Just being
so it turns
devil's
out what I should have done is found my horse, stuck a note in it saying "Send Hellblaster volley gun," and sent it back to the regiment.
Yeah.
Well, it does actually mention a section of the scenario, to be fair, about getting help. So I think that's something the authors thought of, is that you find out it's this horrible monster and you go, do you know what, I'm going to go get the army. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Smoke it out.
Which I suppose you could have done, couldn't you?
That's a good idea.
I mean, maybe being devil's advocate just for a second, do you think that perhaps because we've come from a couple of D&D games that we might have gotten at it with a D&D mindset rather than a more Warhammer mindset, and we should have remembered that things are a lot more dangerous and we're not really supposed to be full-on heroes, and maybe we should have been a bit smarter and, I don't know, got Bob the Builder to bring all his wood to the cave and just build a massive fire at the beginning of the cave and just choke it out. I mean, should we be a bit smarter rather than hero-y? Yeah. So we went full hero, didn't we?
We did, and we know that it had just eviscerated an entire town. But I don't know. If the scenario allowed for that. I think I don't know. I'm just been a bit grumpy because I'm just really aware that I'd spent the first hour of the scenario looking for a position of authority, knowing full well it would fall at our feet anyway, because we are supposed to be the people in charge, aren't we? I know what you're saying, Matt. I think, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. Maybe that would have been a sensible thing to do. But that's tone of campaign, isn't it? And we didn't have the
that's what I'm
benefit
saying
of
is
the previous 20 sessions, did we? To know what we were getting into and to sort of test the tone levels.
Yeah.
I mean, if we'd have ended up with a TPK tonight, I think we'd have been happy with the scenario either way, because it is a one-shot.
Yeah. I mean, it's a
scenario
grim
could help
world
that.
of perilous adventure.
Yeah.
The preparation, it could just say. I mean, when I read that monster, because I've done a bit of Warhammer, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I can't use all the abilities, or that's just not going to go anywhere. And because a lot of them are like global, it doesn't matter if you've got 4 or 5 players. Like, it just affects everybody. So like, you're all going to suffer. So it could really do with some advice on defeating the monster. I think it does have that weakened stage, but it needs to be rewritten in some way to help you out. And there's arguably something about taking the village's ideas and employing them that works. So not a superheated anvil, but fire definitely upsets the creature. It should be more of a flag, possibly, so that you know that you can use fire to give it a broken condition, to talk meta about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, their ideas were pretty good in the end, weren't they?
Yeah.
They weren't bad.
Should listen to them.
So, I mean, you can end up with its maddening aura getting, hatred for your companions, and then you have to make a kill test. You're going to beat them up and that kind of thing.
Amazing.
I think it's just a bit overpowering, that creature, frankly. And it should be set as weakened and not have as many abilities. Just for, I don't know. It feels lethal to me.
So if
I
you
think it's interesting that it's not a Warhammer Classic creature. It's a bespoke one by the looks of it.
Yeah, and I like that. There's some of the bits in the scenario where it says refer to page whatever in Warhammer, but if you're buying a scenario, I do like the idea that you get something new with that scenario, rather than just be some more rat men or whatever.
Well, yeah, but equally I'm thinking that Warhammer, I mean, one of the criticisms of Warhammer way back in the day is that look at the monster selection in Warhammer 1 and it's not that exciting. But the Warhammer world is full of things like Vermin Lords and the Big Four Chaos Demons, what have you. And it even does have dragons, doesn't it? And this is quite a beast that just sits there nameless in a cave and then decides to go on a marauding rampage one day. It doesn't really lead to any other adventures once we put it to the sword.
No, this is definitely a self-contained thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's written as a one-shot, I think.
Yeah, but if it was if it was a Keeper of Secrets, and by the stats, without looking at it, it feels like it's like that kind of level. It feels like a greater demon. That might have led. There was very few hooks into the scenario and very few exits out. Is that too much to ask for a one-shot? Well, maybe it is, but if it is a drop-in one, then why wouldn't you perhaps go for some threads to be picked up or whatever?
Yeah, as the aftermath